Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Why is it okay for you to have this Wednesday fundraising luncheon with 20 people for the suggested $5,000?
Because it's the law. As you know, I have been calling for changes to campaign finance reform since long before I was mayor. Even though members of council, including those who were critical today, have voted against more transparency in campaign finances. So as you also know, and I hope that you will all write about, for both campaigns and including for this one, I operate under a much more stringent set of rules than the law actually allows. That includes, I only do fundraising once. I only do it close to the campaign, where my colleagues, many of them have been doing it continuously for 4 years. I will release the names of all donors before the election, although that's not required by law. And I do not keep any campaign surpluses to start a new election. I start from scratch every time. So given that, I will continue to challenge all other candidates for mayor and for councillor to operate under that level of stringent campaign finance rules, even though it's not the law. And I think it's important to do that. In the case of my own fundraising, in fact, I kicked off my campaign with something I don't think any other candidate has done in years, which is a really cheap fundraiser. $25 a ticket, 400 people came, and they were live tweeting the whole event. We've also had a more traditional stand-up reception for people who like that. We are having coffee parties throughout the campaign in people's homes, for which you don't have to pay a thing. You're welcome to come, and if you want to give a donation at the end, you can. And if people would like to host those coffee parties, give us a call. We'd be thrilled to do that. And in addition to that, of course, anyone who wants to get a meeting with me can always get a meeting with me as long as they disclose who they are. Yet another thing I believe in, transparency. I disclose all of my meetings that I have in my office, and have been doing that since the day I became mayor. And if people want to do that, they can. And finally, I'll just point out that I spend a heck of a lot of time out in the community and a heck of a lot of time talking to citizens about their concerns. In fact, the number one thing that people complain about, my volunteers complain about when they're out with me at an event, is that they have to peel me off of people because I get into conversations. I was in Parkland on Saturday having a very spirited conversation, I was right, on secondary suites with members of the community there, and I love those conversations, and I look forward to doing them all the time.
What about the optics of this particular, you've got 20 people, the invitation says they're going to get time to personally interact with you. They're spending an incredible amount of money to personally interact with you, and it's again 20 hand-picked people.
Well, I think they pick themselves.
Well, they pick themselves, but getting the
themselves,
selective invites.
Oh, I'm sure if someone else wants to come, they would be very welcome to come. I don't know who's on that guest list. It's a privately hosted function, but I'd be pretty surprised if anyone is coming who has not already had lots of time to interact with me on many different files and many different occasions.
So Wes, for the optics of this, of it, people who people who have on Twitter and social media say it's
oh my goodness.
Cash for access.
Well, no, I think only one person has said that.
But
he happens to have a column in the newspaper is all. That's an absolutely ridiculous and baseless statement. I mean, let's be honest here. That's so dumb. I can't even imagine people wanting to go there, because there's never been a mayor more accessible than this one. And certainly but let's see, this weekend I probably interacted with, without a word of an exaggeration, because I was at a bunch of very large events, more than 10,000 Calgarians, none of whom paid a cent to hear me speak or to talk to me about it. So it is kind of ridiculous. And Lord, if we made our decisions about ethics and rules based on what people say on Twitter on a Monday morning, we'd be in a bad world.
So what about the fact?
One last question, then we're going to move to Green Line, folks.
Why did you decide?
I didn't decide it. This is the fundraising team of volunteers that do it, and as I said, we do fundraising at many, many different levels of giving in many, many different ways.
Green Line?
Can you say for those? I know you said before that you disclosed those names before the election. For this particular event, can you say when you would disclose who those donors?
All the names will be disclosed on nomination day, as I've always done, and the day after nomination day, they will be updated. All right. So with that, anyone else on any other topics? Like, I don't know, the $4.65 billion that we just decided to spend?
Well, on Green Line, I mean,
yes.
This sure took a lot to get to today, and what's the biggest work ahead, because there's still a lot of work to do?
There's an enormous amount of work to do, but I'm very happy with where we've gone. This is, as I've said, the largest, not just the largest public works projects in Calgary's history, but 3 times larger than the second largest public works project in Calgary's history. And I wanted to make sure that we were incredibly thoughtful, incredibly rigorous, dotting every I and crossing every T on this to make sure that we don't repeat mistakes of the past in public transit. That includes doing a ton of work on what are the neighborhoods going to look like? How do we make sure that we can make back the investment that we're making in transit through development around the neighborhoods? How do we make sure that the neighborhoods are accessible to all and that we're building great neighborhoods together? And that's why there were so many reports today. That might have been a little bit of a technical detail, but what I thought was really interesting is that we had reports that went through the Community and Protected Services Committee, the Planning and Urban Development Committee, the Land Committee, as well as the Transportation and Transit Committee. And that really speaks to the fact that if we're not looking at it as a transit project, we're actually looking at it as a city building project. I think Minister Mason will be very excited that we've chosen the final alignments. Certainly, I wrote to the Premier and to Minister, well, copy of Minister Mason after we approved the funding, requesting that funding. I have since had the opportunity to speak with the Minister a couple of times about how that decision-making process is going. Obviously, it's a very, very, very big number, but the indications I've had from them is that they're very positive about it. They really see the benefits of the Green Line, and they're thinking hard about how to make it work. So I hope that we'll have a provincial funding announcement very soon.
Can you talk a little bit about the debt in terms of,
Yes.
obviously, when Eric Sawyer presented today, the city can afford to do this, but how restrictive does that make the city's ability to finance any other major projects?
A lot of what we heard today was a little bit speculative based on the nature of the provincial finance. So what you saw today were numbers assuming the province funds the Green Line over a very large number of years. My sense is they may not wish to do that specifically because of the financing costs that would be incurred. And it also assumes that the City of Calgary takes on all the financing costs for the city and the province. If that, in that worst case scenario, that means that we will peak at about 85% of our self-imposed debt limit for 1 year. That's high. It is a self-imposed limit, and one of the things we're really looking at is making sure that we maintain an excellent credit rating, which we have done and will continue to do. Some amount of debt is healthy in terms of maintaining our credit rating, in terms of building stuff that people need. But if we're really at 85%, it will restrict the ability of council to do other very large projects. I've been very, very clear from the beginning of my time as mayor that we only take on long-term debt if we have identified a source to pay it back, which is not just out of the operating budget, not just out of property taxes. And so I would apply the same rigor to this question to make sure that financing has a source to pay for it before we sign any contracts. Surprisingly, the arena is not that huge a project. It is a huge project, but in terms of the numbers we're talking about for the Green Line, even if the city were to pay for an entire arena, which they won't, that would be 1/10 of the cost of the Green Line. So one could still do it, but my council needs to be very, very, very careful in thinking about what obligations they're taking on to buy future councils.
Same with Fieldhouse? On the same with
Fieldhouse is a bit different because we've been searching for funding for that Fieldhouse as our number one unfunded priority. We've been searching for funding for that Fieldhouse as our number one unfunded rec priority for many years. So presumably we would be able to cobble together the money on the Fieldhouse without resorting to debt.
Is there a deadline of when you need construction and everything?
It's not as urgent as one might think because both the province and the federal government did announce in the hundreds of millions of dollars of funding for early works on the Green Line, which we announced late last autumn, and that'll keep us going for a while. That said, how much more work do you want to do unless you know that the project is actually going to be built? But as I say, I've never had a conversation with the province that says, this is a bad project. The only conversations I've ever had with the province on this project are, help us figure out how we can help you. And that's what they're working on.
One last question, folks.
Oh, if the province does not come to the table, then I can't see how we would build it in the currently proposed form. We'd have to radically rethink the project.
But isn't this all one big?
Hey, you're not the one last question, Jack.
It's like the last question. This guy was isn't this all one big job? Green Line.
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all. No, I think it's really important to think of them separately, actually. Like the Green Line literally has nothing to do with the arena, except that there's one stop that might actually serve an arena as you go behind the location. If you ask me that question about the arena and the Olympics, we learned last week that the Olympics would not work without an arena. So yes, they are related in that way. But I'm really pushing council hard to make sure that they're deciding on every issue on its own merits.
Because you're making the infrastructure too. That was one of the sales jobs. Get all the integrated, vertical integration.
It's a teensy portion of the Green Line. That said, I mean, look, if that's the question you're asking, one of the reasons that the Victoria Park location makes sense for a proposed arena, whether privately funded or not, is precisely because there's more people moving in there. There is public investment happening on the Green Line. There's also public investment happening on the road network, on the continuation of 17th Avenue and 4th Street, which makes it a very good location.
Thanks,
Right,
folks.
thanks everybody.